Clyde Shelton, a middle-aged inventor, is deep inside his warehouse tinkering with a nameless device that looks like a crossbreed between a Stone Age airplane and the skeleton of a dead bat. But while he works, a SWAT team is already closing in on the building. Clyde doesn't run. He doesn't panic. He simply strips naked in preparation for the cops, like their arrival is just another step in a plan he already finished years ago. Within seconds, he's cuffed and being dragged down the red carpet into custody, while Nick Rice, the assistant district attorney leading the operation, watches him with quiet unease. Clyde's face is familiar, but his calm makes no sense, and Nick still has no idea what this man really wants. Miles away, a parcel arrives at Nick's house. His 10-year-old daughter happily assumes it's the videotape of her violin recital from the day before. But the moment it plays, the innocence in the room gets butchered. Instead of a school performance, the screen shows a masked man with devil aura going to town on a helpless man's leg with a circular hacksaw. While the excitement flourishes inside Nick's own home, Nick walks into the prison confession room, unaware that Clyde has already reached his family. Sitting across from him, Nick tries to soften Clyde up for a recorded confession, even whispering that Clyde did the world a favor by getting rid of a lowlife like Clarence Darby, the same man being carved apart in the tape.
As a prosecutor, I'm breaking all the rules right now, and I don't give a damn, because I'm a father, I have a little girl, and what you did, bravo. The world is better without Darby and Ames.
To understand why Clyde is sitting there so calmly, the story goes back 10 years. Back then, Clyde is just a regular family man at home, fiddling with electrical components at his table while his little daughter strings square beads into necklaces for her parents. The doorbell rings, and Clyde answers without suspicion, only for Clarence Darby to cave him in with a baseball bat, like he's whacking a mole. Daylight robbery this is, but Darby doesn't stop at robbery. He drives a knife into Clyde's stomach, grins, and spits out his favorite line.
You can't fight fate.
When Clyde's wife rushes in, horrified by the commotion, Darby gives her the same treatment right in front of him. Meanwhile, Darby's partner Ames is still grabbing valuables like a standard robber, but even he starts panicking when the job turns into murder. Their daughter appears in the hallway, too young to understand the crooked strangeness unfolding in her own home. Ames keeps yelling at Darby to pull his shit together because killing the family was never part of the plan. But Darby is as stubborn as he is monstrous, and the last thing Clyde sees before blacking out is that monster carrying his terrified daughter into the next room. A few days later, Clyde sits in Nick Rice's office looking like a man whose life has already been buried. Nick is the state prosecutor assigned to his family's murder case, and he wastes no time explaining the problem. King Darby Turncoat I has agreed to testify against Ames, dumping the worst crimes onto his partner's shoulders. That deal sends Ames to death row, but in exchange for his very kind testimony, Darby will serve 3 years at most before the monster is set loose again. Captain High Achiever insists he originally wanted death for both men, but the DNA evidence on Darby's shirt was thrown out because of some utterly ridiculous exclusionary rule from the judge. Worse, Clyde blacked out before the end, meaning he never actually saw Darby kill his daughter with his own eyes, so his testimony can be attacked. To Nick, someone who adores his high conviction rate, pushing forward without enough admissible evidence could blow the entire case and waste millions in court expenses. Clyde can barely process what he's hearing. Darby being the real monster should be clear as daylight to everyone in the room, but Nick doesn't see the courtroom that way.
It's not what you know, Clyde, it's what you can prove in court.
The words hit Clyde harder than any legal explanation. All he can do is beg Nick not to compromise with a disgusting animal like Darby, but the damage is already done. Mr. Sleazeball has signed the deal, and Clyde's faith in the system dies right there with his family. In court, Darby signs the agreement with disgusting satisfaction, smiling as he condemns Ames for the murder and grape charges he created, even spitting out his catchphrase again.
I mean, you can't fight fate, right?
Outside, Jonas Cantrell, the district attorney and Nick's direct superior, tells Nick not to let the case eat at him. It wasn't perfect, but they secured a death sentence for Ames, and in their world, that counts as a win. So Nick steps in front of the press with his head held high, selling the result as justice served, while everyone else believes Ames is the true monster. But Darby knows exactly what happened. He walks up, offers Nick his hand, and gloats over how the broken justice system worked out for him instead of the victims. Nick is disgusted, but he shakes the devil's hand anyway. Across the courthouse, Clyde watches the whole hellish farce in silence, disbelief written across his face. He and Nick leave without a goodbye. That evening, Nick returns home to his pregnant wife and has a cheerful one-sided conversation with their unborn daughter, both parents smiling at the future they're waiting to hold. 10 years later, that little girl is old enough to perform at a violin recital, but Nick is still the same workaholic. His wife is upset because, once again, he won't be there for their daughter's big moment. Nick looks ashamed, but he still grabs his things and heads to work, promising he'll make time for them some other day. The reason he can't miss work is because Ames' execution is finally happening after 10 years on death row. Behind the glass, Ames is strapped down and prepared for his final trip to the underworld. Before the chemicals start flowing, he uses his last words to say what Clyde already knew. Darby should be the one lying there, not him. It's like being cuckolded while still having to pay for child support, except his outrage changes nothing. The execution begins, and what should be a quiet death turns into a brutal spectacle. Ames starts thrashing, bleeding, and dying in agony while Nick, Sarah, and the other witnesses watch in stunned horror. The investigation reveals the chemicals were deliberately tampered with to make sure Ames didn't go peacefully. And when Nick sees the words written on the back of one bottle, "You can't fight fate," he immediately knows this wasn't random. Not long after, Darby is grinning ear to ear while watching news of his old partner's horrific execution. Then, an anonymous caller tells him to look out his south side window. Darby obeys and instantly sees police vehicles swarming outside. He grabs his pistol and runs, firing blindly toward the cops as the caller guides him toward an abandoned construction site. Darby demands to know why this stranger is helping him, and the answer is simple. The caller doesn't want him going back to prison. At the destination, a cop car is already waiting, with the officer inside seemingly tasered unconscious. Darby steals the cop's gun, wishes him good morning with a hard smack on the head, and forces the man to drive at gunpoint. Once they reach a deserted spot, Darby drags the unarmed cop to his knees, ready to execute him like this is just another mess he can walk away from. Another phone rings, but this time the sound stops Darby cold. The anonymous caller was never some stranger helping him escape. It was the cop on his knees the whole time, and the cop is actually Clyde fucking Shelton in disguise. Darby tries to shoot him, but the borrowed pistol is empty. Worse, his hand suddenly locks up from the needles hidden inside the gun's grip, which he never noticed during the chaos of the police chase. Those needles were loaded with tetrodotoxin, a rare poison taken from the liver of a Caribbean pufferfish, and by now it's already deep in his system. The toxin paralyzes Darby's body while leaving his mind awake enough to understand and feel everything coming next.
In other words, you can't move, but you feel everything. It does absolutely nothing to blunt the pain. And you're about to experience more of that than you could ever imagine.
Clyde calmly admits Darby was right all along. You truly can't fight fate. From there, he clamps Darby down inside the warehouse, sets up adrenaline shots to keep him conscious through the pain, lays out scalpels, medical supplies, and every tool needed to keep the party going as long as possible. Finally, Clyde brings out the circular hacksaw and starts cutting into Darby's right leg. On the bright side, Clyde did keep his promise. He kept Darby out of prison. When it's over, Clyde leaves the warehouse, but not before releasing the sleeping beauty he had hidden inside the trunk of the guy's own patrol car. Back at the office, Nick starts second-guessing his first theory about Ames's execution. That chemical sabotage felt too clean, too calculated, too intelligent to be the work of a one-dimensional brute like Darby. And right as that doubt starts taking shape, Detective Dunnigan and his team discover Darby's corpse because of the cop Clyde released at the murder site. Let's just say Darby is definitely taking the trophy home to his coffin at the yearly Afterlife Ugliness Contest. Clyde immediately becomes the prime suspect. Darby murdered his family 10 years ago, so the motive is obvious. Even worse, investigators discover that Clyde spent the past decade selling off his business assets and buying random warehouses and industrial properties all over Philadelphia. One of those warehouses is exactly where Darby's body was found, or at least all 25-something pieces of it. That trail leads directly back to Clyde's arrest. and soon he's sitting across from Nick in prison, calmly dodging every question without giving them anything they can actually use. Nick finally snaps and says they both know Clyde did it, but Clyde only throws Nick's own words back in his face.
Well, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove in court.
10 years ago, that line protected Darby. Now, Clyde is using it as a weapon, and once Nick has no response, Clyde offers him a deal. One premium Duxiana bed for his prison cell in exchange for a real confession. Nick scoffs, unable to believe Clyde would ask for luxury under murder charges. But Clyde just reminds him of the deal he made with Darby. If Nick could bargain with one murderer back then, why not bargain with another one now? Outside the interrogation room, Nick gets a panicked call from his wife. She and their daughter have seen the tape of Clyde butchering Darby into pieces, but because Clyde wore a helmet the entire time, the video can't prove anything. It was never evidence. It was a message meant to crawl under Nick's skin. Pushed by Jonas Cantrell, Nick finally agrees to Clyde's demand, and just like that, a luxury mattress is delivered into his cell while every other inmate stares at it with green-eyed envy. While Clyde gets comfortable, Sarah keeps digging through his finances. She discovers that Clyde quietly acquired more than half a dozen industrial properties across Philadelphia through a shady corporation in Panama. The problem is that foreign confidentiality makes the actual addresses almost impossible to trace. Still, Nick tells her to keep digging because Clyde clearly hid those properties for a reason. That night, Nick comes home exhausted and tries to calm his terrified wife, telling her to lie to their daughter and say the tape was just some twisted horror film. But even in his own house, he can feel Clyde's reach getting closer. At Clyde's first court hearing, he calmly introduces himself as a law-abiding citizen with no criminal history and no real evidence tying him to the crimes. Holding him without proof, he argues, sets a dangerous precedent for every future case. The judge actually starts buying it and nearly considers releasing him until Clyde begins laughing and clapping in open amusement. When she asks what's funny, Clyde explains that she has already been manipulated into favoring an alleged murderer just because he threw fancy legal language in her face. To him, that same blind worship of procedure is exactly how Darby escaped death 10 years ago.
How misguided are you? I feed you a couple of bullshit legal precedents, and there you go. You jump on it like a bitch and eat. Folks, you all hang out in the same
Mr.
little
Shelton,
club.
you
and
will
every
be held
day
in
you let
contempt of this
madmen and
court.
murderers back on the street. You're too busy treating the law like it's a f***ing
time.
assembly line.
One
You
more
have any
time.
idea what justice
You
is?
are-
Clyde may or may not have a point, but he definitely loses his bail after cursing out the judge in front of the entire courtroom. Later, Clyde keeps his side of the bargain and confesses to staging the murders of both Clarence Darby and Rupert Ames. Nick bravely wants specifics, but soon feels like vomiting after Clyde shares having taken Darby's family jewels with a hacksaw and his little Darby with a box cutter, among other things. That said, since Nick now has the confession, he assumes their business is done. Clyde can rot in prison forever, and Nick can go home. But as Nick walks away, Clyde calls after him with another offer. This time, he wants a 20-ounce porterhouse steak from Del Frisco's for a proper prison lunch. In exchange, he'll give them the location of Bill Reynolds, Darby's former defense lawyer from 10 years ago. The catch is simple. Lunch must arrive at exactly 1 p.m. or Clyde won't be responsible for what happens. Nick accepts, but the lunch arrives 8 minutes late because the warden doesn't take Clyde's deadline seriously. Clyde is amused, more than angry. After a few bites of asparagus with his plastic spork, he finally gives up Reynolds' location, sending Nick, Dunnigan, and the others sprinting out of the prison. With the officials gone, Clyde's cellmate threatens to bash his skull in if he doesn't share the steak. Clyde calmly lets him sit down. One moment, they're eating together, like old friends. The next, Clyde is driving the pointed spork into the man's neck again and again, until he's left bathing in his own blood. Needless to say, Clyde Shelton doesn't share his beloved steak with nobody. Meanwhile, the reason for the deadline becomes clear. Bill Reynolds had been missing for 3 days, and Clyde buried him alive with a limited oxygen supply. Nick and Dunnigan reached the location only minutes too late, because Reynolds' air ran out at exactly 1:15 p.m. In other words, they really shouldn't have delayed Clyde Shelton's lunch. After turning his cellmate's neck into bloody flowers, Clyde is moved into solitary. Nick visits him there, only to find that Clyde feels no shame over Reynolds' death. In Clyde's mind, Reynolds had to be held accountable for helping Darby escape real justice 10 years ago. But when Nick asks about the dead cellmate, Clyde says nothing at all, and that silence matters more than it seems. That night, Jonas brings Nick to meet one of Clyde's former spy contacts. That's right, Clyde used to be a spy, and not just some regular field agent, but the kind of mastermind who could kill people in bizarre ways without ever being in the same room. The contact warns them that Clyde never does anything without purpose. If Clyde is in jail, it's because he wants to be in jail. And if he killed his cellmate, it probably wasn't over a lunch dispute. The man was likely marked from the start.
What I'm saying is just assume that this guy can hear and see everything that you're doing.
No, we got him locked away, maximum security.
If he's in jail, it's because he wants to be in jail. He's a born tactician. Every move that he makes, it means something.
Before leaving, the contact gives Nick and Jonas the only advice he thinks will work. Walk into Clyde's cell and put a bullet in his head while they still can. Finally understanding the size of the threat, Nick and Jonas arrange a private meeting with the judge to discuss how to contain Clyde. But the conversation is interrupted by a phone call. The judge answers, and her head explodes right in front of them, leaving Nick and Jonas frozen in horror. Once again, Nick sits across from Clyde in the interrogation room. Nick calls him insane, convinced this is all just vengeance, but Clyde corrects him. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's a crusade against the broken justice system that failed his family and protected the people who destroyed them.
What do you want, Clyde? You at war with the whole world? It's not gonna bring anybody back?
No, I'm at war with this broken thing. This thing that brought you and I together.
This broken thing works for people that are sane. You think doing what you're doing is gonna change anything?
Nick swears it's only a matter of time before they find Clyde's mysterious helper on the outside, but Clyde sneers and gives them a deadline instead. Drop all charges and release him by 6 a.m. tomorrow, or everybody is cooked. And for the first time, the entire district attorney's office starts genuinely tweaking. The staff holes up inside the prison overnight, chasing any clue that might expose Clyde's supposed outside helper. During the scramble, Sarah reveals that a mysterious friend of hers may be able to track the major expenses from Clyde's Panama Corporation, which could finally reveal the addresses of his hidden properties. It's the first real lead they've had all night. But while they wait, Sarah presses Nick on the question he keeps avoiding. Does he regret cutting that deal with Darby all those years ago just to protect his near-perfect conviction record? Nick goes dead silent. Then 6 a.m. arrives, and nothing happens. For one brief second, it looks like Clyde was bluffing. Nick calls it a day, only for half a dozen of his colleagues, Sarah included, to be blown out of the atmosphere moments later. Every car except Nick's had a bomb hidden in the gas tank. The supposed outside helper has just turned the district attorney's office into a graveyard. The massacre explodes across the news, and the mayor starts crashing out at Nick and Jonas for letting Clyde's war reach this level. All they can do is stand there in shame and promise to do better. Back home, Nick wastes no time sending his wife and daughter away on vacation, terrified that Clyde's mysterious outside helper might come for them next. With his family out of reach, he returns to the prison, where Clyde is finally invited into a deserted courtyard. The moment Nick gets close, all the grief, fear, and humiliation explode out of him, and he punches Clyde in the face again and again. But even now, Nick refuses to fully admit what Clyde wants him to admit. He argues that if he had taken the case to trial 10 years ago and lost, Darby and Ames might have both walked free. But Clyde could have lived with that outcome. What destroyed him was that Nick never even tried. To Clyde, Nick cared less about justice than protecting his polished career record, and that compromise is the wound he's been cutting open ever since. Now, his war has grown beyond revenge and turned into an attack on the corrupt temple of the legal system itself.
This is Von Clausewitz shit. Total fucking war. I'm gonna bring the whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's gonna be biblical.
The following evening, Nick and Jonas stand over Sarah's grave, crushed by the cost of Clyde's latest move. Jonas wonders if they brought all of this on themselves, but Nick finally stops hiding behind the system and admits the blame belongs to him. When he was younger, he wanted to be a warrior angel of justice for the people. But somewhere along the way, the system he wanted to change changed him instead. The confession hangs in the air with nowhere to go. Not long after, as Jonas leaves the graveyard, his vehicle is suddenly smoked by a hidden military-grade bomb disposal robot, remote-controlled by God knows whom from God knows where. The mayor is devastated after losing such an important official, and Nick feels even more useless than before. He tries to resign as assistant district attorney, but the mayor refuses to let him run from the mess. Instead, she promotes him to district attorney on the spot, filling Jonas' empty seat and making one thing clear. Nick is the source of this disaster, so now he has to be the one to clean it up. The next day, Sarah's mysterious friend Chester, who was actually her boyfriend all along, sends over the report on Clyde's corporate expenses. Nick is stunned and grateful, But more importantly, the report finally gives him the missing map. By matching Clyde's Panama payments with the sale prices of Philadelphia properties over the last 10 years, Nick traces every secret property Clyde owns in the city. One address immediately sticks out like a sore thumb because it sits right next to the prison. So Nick and Dunnigan head there to see what Clyde has been hiding. At this point, Nick is done worshiping rules while Clyde keeps murdering people through loopholes. So he and Dunnigan shamelessly break into the property. Inside, they find the answer that blows the whole case open: a network of tunnels connecting the warehouse directly to the prison. The tunnels lead to the solitary cells, meaning no matter where Clyde is locked up, he can slip out into the city whenever he wants. And suddenly, the cellmate murder makes perfect sense. Clyde didn't kill him over steak. He killed him to get sent to solitary. The outside helper was never outside at all. Clyde has been leaving the prison himself the entire time. Dunnigan crawls through the tunnel into Clyde's cell, but Clyde is already gone. In the tunnel office, Nick studies Clyde's schedule and realizes where he's heading next: Philadelphia City Hall. At that exact moment, Clyde is already inside, disguised as a cleaner and gliding through security like he belongs there. His target is the council chamber, where the mayor is about to hold an emergency meeting with the city's top officials. All Clyde has to do is plant the bomb beneath them and wait. Nick and Dunnigan put the pieces together on the way to City Hall, but instead of triggering a massive evacuation, they move quietly with a bomb technician. Clyde has proven he can smell a SWAT response from a mile away, and if he sees panic too early, he might detonate the cabbage ahead of schedule. Inside, they locate the device on the 5th floor, a cell phone-triggered bomb with 30 seconds between the call and the blast. Dunnigan wants to warn the mayor immediately, but Nick stops him. This time, beating Clyde means staying calm enough to deny him control. Far away, Clyde slips back into his warehouse and crawls through the tunnels toward his solitary cell. From there, he watches the City Hall council chamber through CCTV as the mayor gives a passionate speech about ending his reign of terror no matter the cost. Desperate times call for desperate measures, after all. But when Clyde climbs back into his cell, the color drains from his face. Nick is waiting for him. Even caught in 4K, Clyde still carries himself like the man in control. One press of the button in his hand is enough to smear the night sky with the firework remains of the mayor and the city's top officials. He sneers and asks if Nick wants to make one final deal. But Nick doesn't bargain this time. The new district attorney of Philadelphia doesn't make deals with murderers anymore, a lesson Clyde taught him in blood. For the first time, Clyde smiles like he finally got what he wanted. Nick has changed. His point has been made.
Maybe I wasn't such a bad teacher after all.
If you go through with this, Clyde, it's a decision you'll have to live with for the rest of your life.
But Clyde is too far gone to stop. Hurt people, as they say. He presses the button anyway, and Nick looks at him with pity, telling him he now has to be held accountable for his actions, just like everyone Clyde punished before him. With that, Nick locks the cell door and skedaddles out of the prison. At the same time, Dunnigan seals the tunnel entrance behind Clyde and bunny hops to safety through the tunnels. Clyde realizes he's been checkmated. The bomb he planted at City Hall is no longer under City Hall. It's under his own bed. With no escape left, Clyde simply smiles and looks down at the bracelet his daughter made for him 10 years ago. Seconds later, the entire solitary wing is blown to smithereens by the same bomb he had prepared for the mayor and the city officials. And after the smoke finally clears, Nick does what he failed to do at the start of all this. On a peaceful night, he sits with his wife and watches their daughter perform at her violin recital. Now, as a better father, a better man, and a better district attorney.